Hey, David.
Hey, how are you?
Fantabulous, man. How you doing?
I'm getting ready for one of those days. It's the first of like 6 interviews today. So, and I've been doing that for about 2 weeks. I'm in that proselytization book tour thing. So I'm enjoying it a lot.
Good. Well, good. I get you when you're fresh. I get the fresh David.
Yeah.
No diminishing returns here. So yeah, I mean, let's get right into it, man. I mean, I love what you're doing. You really seem to have a good take on the old noggin, the brain, the inner operatings, workings, and you wrote several books. I mean, why don't you kind of just tell me a little bit and tell the audience about, your journey to get here and what you're doing and the changes you're trying to make and help the world to make some of these changes as well.
Oh man, I don't know how far back you want to go. I'm a science journalist now, but it took a while to get there. I started out, honestly, way back, I was in a really terrible car wreck, and I took the money from the settlement from that car wreck and opened a pet store with it, which I thought would be really fun. I had always gone to I spent the summers on my grandparents' farm, and I loved animals and thought that'd be a great thing. Turns out, if you really love animals, although there are people who are great at owning pet stores, it wasn't the sort of interaction I wanted. So I moved on from that to, I did actually open 2 pet stores before it was, and then I went from that to, went to school for psychology, and then near the end of that, I switched to journalism because there was a sign up in the, just on campus that said, "Are you opinionated?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm pretty opinionated." And I went to the office of the student newspaper and said, "How does this work?" And they said, "Just email us stuff." And I was taking all these psych classes, and this is really sort of the origin moment of all this.
Yeah, your serendipitous spark kind of moment where, had that not happened,
yeah,
which way would your life have gone? Yeah,
because I wrote this article. It was I had read, we had learned in class, and there was new research. I don't even know if it's been replicated or how it held up over the years, but it was when your sports team loses, your sperm count goes down, was sort of the thing about the research. And I was like, oh, that's funny, because our university had lost every single one of its football. So I thought it would be funny to write an article with a headline that said, sperm counts on campus reach record lows according to scientists. And then, that's the joke, is that when you read the article, it's actually about that.
That's awesome. That's the title, right? That's the magical, I think, thing that every writer, every blogger is always trying to get out, is that headline that combines wit and interest and intrigue and, but yet nails exactly what the article's about. So well done. Yeah, that was a good title. I would have read it for sure.
Thanks. So that's how it all started. That I switched from that to journalism, and then I paid my dues. I worked in newspapers and then TV and a bunch of other stuff, and eventually found my way into blogging, and then from there into podcasting, and then from podcasting to writing books about all this. And that's the circuitous route. I mean, it's a long story, but that's the shortest version I could think of.
Yep. And so now, how did you switch into, these books that you're focusing on now with, how the mind works and how they affect our lives, and trying to help, get your mind working for instead of against you? How did that happen?
Well, I had been fascinated by these blogs that had these very single ideas back in the day when blogs were the thing, right? And there were these blogs like Shit My Dad Says and Look at Awkward Family Photos and stuff like that. I wanted something that was very thin sliced. And one of my favorite bits of research was the person swap study. It was actually about change blindness, but it was Darren Brown had done a version of it for one of his shows. And he often gets psychologists to help him create new mentalist routines. And the way that works is somebody's asking for, they're asking for directions on a college campus to like the commons, and then 2 people walk between them holding something very large like a door, and one of the people holding the thing switches places with the person who was asking for directions. And then they measure to see, does the person notice? This person noticed there's a completely different person standing in front of them now. And about half the time people don't notice. And I thought there was a lot to say there in that we often assume we're getting a one-to-one of the world around us, and not just with like what we see, and not just through our perceptions, but just our thoughts and feelings and behaviors. They feel like they are. We have this overconfidence in all these things. And I thought that would be a great idea for a blog. And I named it "You Are Not So Smart." I attribute 85% of my success to coming out with a title that hadn't been taken yet. That was sort of like a little bit insulting. But
again, you nailed the title, man.
But then
you could just write titles for a living and nothing else. I mean, those are two awesome ones, right? And when I looked at the names, I was like, oh, I want to read these. Yes. Okay, so continue.
And then I started that blog, and it was just like any other blog back in the day. It was like starting a Medium account or something. It was like, just because you started doesn't mean people care.
Right.
I maybe had like 1,500 fans at some point, and was feeling pretty good about that. And then I wrote an article about. I got into an argument with two of my friends over which was better, the Xbox 360 or the PlayStation 3.
Ooh, whoa.
We got.
What was your side?
Oh, I was a big PlayStation guy.
Me too. I've always been PlayStation.
But I bought them both eventually. But just because I wanted to play the games with my friends because they were all on 360. We got so mad, like we got so angry with each other, and I thought, where's this anger coming from? And it's just a box full of wires. Like, who cares? Like, so I was interested in this branding identity thing that people do when they get into like Chevy, Ford, iPhone, Android. And I wrote an article about that. I just went and got all the literature. I had a nice scientific background because I had almost finished my degree in psychology and switched to journalism. So I just used the university library and got all the literature on little brand loyalty, identity in that regard. And I wrote an article about that. And this just so happened to come out when the iPhone prototype was stolen by a major blog called Gizmodo. It was stolen at a bar, and they got a lot of hits out of that because Steve Jobs like literally emailed them and said, "Give me back my phone."
Yep.
So I think they just had like a Google alert or something going, and they just looked for anything that they could throw into the gaping maw of content for their website. And that piece mentioned a little bit about the Apple versus PC wars of the day. And they said, "Can we reblog your blog?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." And when that went onto their website, I got 250,000 new fans that afternoon.
Wow.
And so I started writing like crazy. I was like blog post, like just go, more content. And it was getting lots of response, and I was getting lots more followers. And then an agent reached out to me, who was still my agent, the great Erin Malone Borba, who had worked on Freakonomics. And she said, "Would you like to join this world of people who write books, but in that voice that you have developed on the internet?" I was like, "I would very much like that." And that's how the whole thing started from there. And I started the podcast just to promote the second book, but then the podcast slowly became the sort of centerpiece of everything that I do. And it's where I sort of workshop all my ideas and go on adventures and get obsessed with things and things that seem to be worth taking out of that and putting somewhere else. That's been sort of the vehicle for this latest book. How Minds Change was the last 5 years of the podcast. Every 2 or 3 episodes, I've been doing something related to persuasion and polarization and tribal psychology and conspiratorial thinking and all that sort of stuff. And I had so much material. Then I went out on the road and added to it like a bunch more stuff. And that became the sort of the way this project leapt out of the podcast.
So let's get into some of this stuff. So you've now written 3 books, correct? And this is your most recent that you're basically.
Yeah, it came out about almost a month ago.
Yeah, and tell the audience again the name and where they can find Amazon. I assume it's probably the best.
Yeah, anywhere. They want. It's one of those things as an author. You're like, do you want to play trying to get on the lists like the Wall Street Journal and New York Times? They have their own algorithms that they won't let people see. There's 7 herbs and spices they won't let anybody know about. As I understand it, they weight independent bookstores more than they do Amazon. But I don't care where you get it. Get it. I would hope you get it from your independent bookstore if possible, just to support that. But you can get it anywhere they sell books. The audiobook, I did the audiobook too, which was one of my favorite experiences in all this. I was in New Orleans for a week doing like 8-hour days, just reading the whole book out loud and being very meticulous about how it's presented. It's called How Minds Change, and it is an exploration of not only how minds change when it just comes to experience and living your life and learning things and your childhood and all that sort of stuff. But also it gets deep into how do we change each other's minds? Like how does persuasion work? How does conversation change people's minds? How does deliberation and argument and all those things? And then it slowly scales up to how does that cascade whenever an entire nation or entire culture,
Well, let's get into this. This is fascinating to me. This is something, so sorry to cut you off, but I mean, it just makes me think immediately. The first thing I think about is like this huge bipolarity that's going on, not only in the United States, but the entire world with politics in particular, but it's spread way beyond just politics. I think it started with politics when Trump became president. It just really polarized a lot of people. And it was like, you were either all in or you're like all out, and you're like, and both sides looked at the other ones like they were, at first it was like, not a big deal. I feel like, you're kind of crazy. But then it became more and more serious, and especially I think when the re-election and all that, and it became obviously, January 6th, and a lot of hatred got involved, and it just really became like, you're my enemy if you disagree with the way I think. And I'm fascinated by that stuff as well, because, obviously when you take a 10,000 step foot back and you look at why people think the way they think, there's all these variables going into it, right? It was their parents, it was their schooling, it was their peers, it's the media that they now ingest, and it tracking them and showing them more of what it thinks they want to see, even if it's not, accurate, and all these different things that have people form their opinion. And kind of, you mentioned something earlier about perception and reality being, how people like they really get just hard, fast saying that this is my reality and there's no other reality. And that's really what it seems to be, is people just like you were talking about the Xbox and the PS3. It's like, no, my reality is that the Xbox is better. No, my reality is PS3. And you go all in. But at the end of the day, we're all just like human beings that want the same shit, right? We just all want to be happy. We all want to like be able to do the things we love to do and feel like we're growing every day. And it's amazing to me now that like half the world hates the other half. So I'm curious to get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, well, one thing is, this is not new. This is just something people have done since there's been people.
Right.
There's been the waxing and waning of how intense and polarized political discourse is in the United States and around the world is something that goes back and forth, back and forth. There's a real urge, I think, to blame this on social media, to blame this on the internet, to blame this on one particular political camp or the other. But at the end of the day, this is none of those things. Those things are all just force multipliers for the very, very base human psychology that's at play. And it has happened many times and will happen many times again. What's going on here is, for the most part, what we're experiencing this extreme polarization is that, as the great Brooke Harrington, the sociologist, told me, the E equals MC square of social science is that social death, the fear of social death is greater than the fear of physical death. And what that points to is that all human cognition is motivated. All reasoning is motivated. If you I think the best example of that would be when you're falling in love with someone, all their little quirks are the reason why you are falling in love with them. Like, this is why I like that person. And then when you're breaking up with someone, those same quirks are the reason why you're breaking up with that person.
Right. What changed? Right. What changed?
What's actually happening here is you have a motivation, a drive. You have all this stuff and then you go searching for reasons to justify why you feel that way. And then when you find those reasons in retrospect or in introspect, you'll say this, you go backwards, like, this reason is why I like that person, or this reason is why I don't like that person. But really you're motivated by something deeper that's difficult to articulate. So when it comes to like changing your mind or your mind evolving over time, the brain walks this tightrope. It's dangerous to be wrong, but it's also dangerous to be ignorant. So if you don't change your mind when you should, you could stay wrong. But if you do change your mind when you shouldn't, you could become wrong. And in a proto-human environment, that can mean getting eaten or not eating. And so we're very careful. But over a long period of time of they call assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is when you encounter new, novel, ambiguous information and you disambiguate it by making it seem like it fits into your current understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And accommodation is when you realize that's impossible. I need to update my understanding to accommodate that. A good example of that would be like if a child sees a dog for the first time and they point at it and you say dog, and in their mind something categorical happens, like they're thinking non-human, walks on four legs, furry dog. And then they see a horse and they point at it and go dog.
Yeah.
That's
I've got a 3-year-old, so I've just been through this phase and still kind of going through it.
That's assimilation, right? They're like trying to fit what they're seeing into the category they created. And then you say, no, that's not a dog, that's a horse. They have to accommodate, and that's literally expanding your mind, because you have to create a new perceptual category that both horses and dogs will fit into, and that requires a greater, deeper, more complex model. So we're doing that all the time, but we're walking that tightrope of let's assimilate if we can and accommodate if we must. And so we always resist changing our mind a little bit, but as those models get more and more complex, we start really weighting the assimilation, because at least it got us here. And so that resistance is built in at baseline, but then all these other motivations will bump the resistance up. And the one I mentioned about social death is the strongest motivation in the entire human psyche. Like, we are social primates, we're ultra social primates, and we care a whole lot about what other people think of us. We care a whole lot about our reputations. We care a whole lot about the possibility of ostracism or shame or anything along those regards. And
which goes back to, sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah,
right, correct me if I'm wrong, if you agree with this, but back to our primordial days, right, when we were scavenging around, and it basically served us from an evolution standpoint to be around more people, because you're less likely to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger if you're in a group, right?
Oh yeah, we're social primates. Everything that got us to where we are today came from interacting with other people, group-based goal creation, group-based planning, being able to depend on people through reciprocal altruism, all of it. We're not a loner type animal.
Right. When you look at the society and the world we live in, right, it wasn't one person. Yeah. Good point.
Kind of weird though that different cultures will emphasize that or de-emphasize that more. And the United States, especially Southern United States, Middle America, 21st century people, we have a cultural value of individualism, but it's very illusory. Like, the concept that we're all rugged individuals who make our own way in the world without anybody's help, or that our thoughts and beliefs and opinions came from, we sat down and we looked at all the evidence. We went down into some sort of cellar and took out scrolls and like, oh yes, this is what I think about. So like, there's social psychology's the research is very robust in this regard. Most of your attitudes came from hanging out with other people who shared those attitudes.
Right.
So most of your beliefs are held up by the fact that elites that you trust and peers that you trust support it. So it's odd that we have a cultural value of individualism, but that value is itself is formed within us because we were influenced by the culture in which we grew.
Right.
So,
right.
Because we're not individuals in that way, we think we're individuals in that way.
It's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg, right?
So all that plays into what the internet gave us, what social media gave us. And for many of us now, many people have been born into this world. And some of us, like myself, got to watch it form or be handed over and say, hey, play with this new tool. There are two big factors. One is, if you have an anxiety, imagine you're in a tent in the woods and you hear a sound and you're scared, and you have this anxiety boiling up inside you. It's a negative affect. It's a bad feeling. And you want to confirm that it's reasonable to feel that way, because since we're social animals, we have this desire to gather evidence that we can present to our peers and say, I don't feel very good. I think it's a good thing that I don't feel good. You should feel good. I want to justify this.
Right.
Show you that this is reasonable, that you can trust me for feeling this. So you go and you take your flashlight, you look around and see if there's a bear. You look for information to confirm that your feelings are justified. Well, when we do that in a modern context, it's like Clay Shirky has this great line. Technology doesn't create behavior, it just lowers the cost to exhibit behavior that's been there for a million years. go online, look, we have an anxiety. For some people, it's a prejudice. Some people have very hateful, hurtful attitudes and prejudiced viewpoints. But sometimes it's just an anxiety about something weird's going on in the world, or something new is happening. Whether it could be something like COVID, maybe. And you have this anxiety. You go online looking for other people who share your anxiety, just like you would in any other environment, because you want to talk about it. You want to sort it out. But what the internet often does is, first of all, you definitely will find people who share your anxiety. You definitely will find people who share your prejudices. You definitely will find people who share your viewpoint. You may not have been aware of it until you did the search, but you will find it. And then once you find it, once you start engaging in conversations, you start building a reputation within that community, you'll start returning to it over and over again. And now it doesn't matter how you got there. It doesn't matter the entry point. What matters now is you're in a community. And when that kicks in, that's the motivation that rises at the top. And we will do everything we can to stay part of that group and maintain some sort of reputation with it.
Right. Everything in us, right, will just claw that. And I think that you've hit it on the head, and going, like this whole, this polarization that's happening. It's like, well, you can't be right because that means I'm wrong. And if I'm wrong, everything I've built my life on is bullshit. And like, people just literally can't process that, right? It's like, no.
I mean, it's so many things at once. There's that's in there for sure. I don't think people articulate it, but you feel it.
Right.
And the other is just, there is such a strong sense of that they use the term tribal psychology. I don't think that's, I think they're trying to diminish the use of that. It's a bit problematic to say tribal, but you can use the old terms of in-group versus out-group bias. The idea is that this is a great researcher, Henri Tajfel. He was, way back in the day, he was like really worried. It's like, how did the Nazis happen, basically, is what he's trying to figure out. And the prevailing idea at the time was very, very charismatic leaders can group people up and get them. Well,
I think we've seen that in the last 4 years.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. I know it feels that way, but the research does not support this as actually what's going on. What usually happens is charismatic leaders take groups that already exist and activate them to give them political power. So the weird thing is, these groups can be grouped up over anything. But Tajfel discovered this. He wanted to know, he's trying to understand that, but he was like, I wonder, this groupish behavior we keep seeing that's so problematic, like what is the least like fun, what is the most inconsequential thing I could get a group of people to become a group around, like to form a group identity around? And he thought what he would do is he would take one thing out at a time until you got down to what he would call the minimal group paradigm. And so he started with, anyway, he said, I'll start with nothing and add one thing at a time. He made this thing, it was dots. He was like, look at this page of dots. You have 3 seconds, and okay, he takes it away. He's like, how many dots did you see? And he didn't actually care what you said. He would randomize you as saying that you were an underestimator or overestimator. And once he did that, he said, okay, you underestimated how many dots there were. You're an underestimator. I'm going to put you in this group of other underestimators. And then after that, he did all these other experiments where he would give people an opportunity to choose like money allotments and stuff for doing tasks, where either your side got the same amount as the other side, or your side got more than the other side, or you could make it so both sides got less than you could get, but you made sure that your side got more. They would do all these things and then you didn't get any of that. Like, there was no reward for you. You were choosing it for other groups.
Right.
And he was astonished that just being called an overestimator, underestimator, people started grouping up and doing us versus them things. And they started saying horrible stuff about the them. So, overestimators are the worst, that they're selfish, they're immature.
Mm-hmm.
And that research has been repeated about a gazillion times.
Right. That reminds me, I'm sure you've heard of that study back in the 70s. I mean, we watched it in school. I think a lot of public schools show it. A really good one where they had the different color bands on. Yeah. The kids, and the teacher put right. Yeah. I think, if I remember correctly. And then it was like, and she did an experiment like, okay, you guys are this and you guys are this. And if I remember correctly, it was like the ones with the one color had no privileges and were looked down on, and they basically were kind of told to the other group to basically be like, they're inferior to you. Yeah. And just watching these children just, and I mean, this experiment, God, I wish I could remember the name of it. Maybe you do, but it was fascinating. It reminds me of that because it's like, right, when you get grouped and then you basically, that becomes your persona and you're all in on that. You're like, yeah, this is us. Like and even if you don't really necessarily believe, but you see somebody else doing something like violent or screaming and then, yeah, you know, and they get behind it. It's wild.
Yeah, it's called the minimal group paradigm, and the big takeaway is that we will form groups around literally anything, and once we've done so, our behavior is identical to the way people react in political environments, religious environments, cults, pseudo cults, conspiratorial communities. What it shows is that the people who are in any group, whether you're arguing politics or you're arguing your conspiratorial beliefs or whatever, the beliefs are irrelevant. The facts are irrelevant. The issue at stake is irrelevant. What's actually happening is you're just trying to exert that us better than them. And
right.
It's not to say the issues aren't important and that you don't have all sorts of attitudes surrounding them, but in the framing of, should I reach across the aisle and talk to this person? Should I try to coordinate some sort of understanding of why we disagree? Like, we resist all that stuff.
Yeah.
Simply because it's a them versus us situation that we're
totally.
not. And not only, the thing about it is, this is gross, right? Nobody wants to think about that. Nobody wants to admit that this is happening. Nobody wants to. I don't like that we do this. Nobody likes to think that they're doing this, but research is pretty clear that that's.
Oh, we do it. Yeah, this is what we're doing, and right. I mean, this leads to racism. It leads to the political divides, like we were talking about. It leads to all sorts of prejudices and all different gays.
You like, once you're in that frame, you go looking. You have this emotion. You have this motivation, this emotional standpoint, and you go looking for evidence to support it. So you look at all the evidence available to you, and you cherry pick that which seems like supporting for it. And when you engage, that's why in the book I'm so I build you up to this point where I'm talking about how you properly have a conversation about something like this, where you could change someone's mind. Like, you can't start with the conclusions. You can't start with facts.
Right.
Dump a bunch of links on a person or say, hey, watch this YouTube video, because that you arrived at that through the same process. Like, this is stuff that you feel supports your side because you're starting with your motivation and you're reaching for justification. You find something that really seems to support your point of view, and it's this misconception that if I hand that to you and you see it, it's like a magic spell where you go to my side on the issue, but they're just going to interpret it through the same process that they're using to find everything they find to support.
Like you said, cherry picking, I think, is a good word in there, because that's exactly what happens, right? It's like, it doesn't matter what the sentence could be like 100% like clear evidence going one way, and somebody will take like one word and be like, yeah, but look.
Yeah, they call it.
And it's like, what?
In psychology, it's a nice term.
They call it what?
Selective skepticism. Where it's a sort of, can I believe this? Must I believe this situation? Because it goes back to assimilation and comedy. In general, it just isn't going to work. You're going to generate what they call reactants.
Okay, so how do you change? Let's get into that. How do you change the best way to do it? Mind.
Through the course of writing this book, I spent time with a lot of different groups, professional organizations, activist organizations and such, who had each developed through A/B testing their own technique. And I think one of the most shocking revelations for me was deep canvassing, street epistemology, smart politics, and so on. They all had, some of them had like 16, 17,000 conversations A/B tested, throwing out what doesn't work, keeping what does. They'd all arrived at the same technique, pretty much. It was the same tenets. Usually, if they're listed in order, it's the same order. And when I went to talk to experts about it, they said this is, it's very similar to things like motivational interviewing, which is something that's very popular in therapeutic models, therapy settings, cognitive behavioral therapy, and so on. They divide these up into two big groups, two big kinds of conversation techniques. One's called technique rebuttal, and one's called topic rebuttal. Topic rebuttal is when you dump a bunch of facts on a person. Topic rebuttal is what happens when two people stand behind a lectern on a stage and debate. There's an audience. This is there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing in an environment where everybody's playing by the same rules and we all understand what we have to do to admit that maybe we're wrong about something. That's usually not the environment in any other situation. If I'm talking to a friend or a family member, or I'm having an argument on the internet, we are not engaged. Topic rebuttal is the worst thing you could possibly do.
Can we pause there real quick?
Yeah.
I think that's fascinating that there's, I mean, so I immediately think of debate and debate clubs, right? And how like that's become a very, just like you said, because that's the way our minds work. And that's been the mainstream way that we've tried to convince others of our opinion, to the point where there's actually clubs and contests and prizes for people that can dump the most amount of facts. Even though you're never going to convince the person you're debating against, you've got a third-party judge saying, you dumped better facts than that guy. I mean, that's wild to think about.
Yeah, and oftentimes on social media, we're imagining the audience. If you have an argument on like Facebook or Twitter, like, you know, you're not just arguing with that person. You're imagining all the people who are going to dogpile and hot take everybody. You know,
right.
So you've got to get out of that frame. The debate frame is not what you want to do. It's
right.
If you are in the win versus lose frame, nobody wants to lose. But the only person who wins a debate is the person who doesn't change their mind, right? You've got to get out of this conflict. I'm going to prove I'm right and you're wrong binary way of looking at it.
Right.
Because people are going to resist that heavily. It's going to be immense reactance. What you have to do is switch it from a face-off to a shoulder-to-shoulder situation. The idea is you're going to try to encourage the other person to collaborate with you, to join up, partner up, to try to solve the mystery of why do you think it is we disagree on this? And that is a completely different framing. This falls into what is called technique rebuttal, which is a whole different class of persuasion and conversation and argument. But people are familiar with one version of technique rebuttal, which is the Socratic method, where you just ask a person, why do you believe that? And then when they tell you, say, why do you believe that? And you keep tunneling down as hard as you can. There are much more nuanced ways of going about it, though. I'll share one with you called street epistemology, which I think is really, really well done. When you open up the conversation, you have to first determine, you know, are we talking about a belief or an attitude or a value? They are separate things. Like if somebody tells you they think the president's a bad president, that's not a belief. That's an attitude. They're telling you, I have evaluated this emotionally and I have a negative evaluation.
Right.
That's not the same as a belief. There can be beliefs that support that evaluation, and that evaluation affects beliefs, but you're not trying to change their beliefs. You're trying to change how they feel about something, which is different altogether. But let's say the issue is something like the earth is flat, which is a nice neutral thing we could talk about. The first thing you want to do is avoid reactance. Reactance is that feeling, you can't tell me what to do, feeling that people get whenever you say you should believe what I'm telling you you should believe, or what these other people say you should believe. That generates an immediate emotional response of, I want to get rid of this stimulus. I don't like the way it makes me feel. Instead, you want to build rapport and say, be transparent and open and say, I'm interested in learning more about how you feel about this issue. I'd like to explore your reasoning behind it. You know, maybe you entertain the possibility of seeing it differently. I'd love to just kind of get a better picture of what's going on here. Your own words, but open up in that way and get full buy-in from the other person and give them the opportunity to opt out at any time, and you'll avoid reacting. And then open with, you want, if it's the flat Earth thing, if it's a very specific fact-based issue, ask for a specific claim in there. Like, give me something very specific within this flat Earth thing that you believe. They give you that, and then you try to clarify all their definitions. Make sure you use their words and not yours. So what you're doing here is moving the conversation all the way over to their side, and you're keeping it out of your side. No copy paste of your thoughts.
Right. You're repeating it back in a non-judgmental way, basically.
Right, and then repeat it back to the point where you keep asking, like, do I hear you correctly? Have I got this right? And then ask for a level of confidence from 0 to 10. So how strongly do you believe this? Like where are you at on this? 0 to 10. And when they give you a number, most people won't give 0 or 10. If they do, they're in what they call the pre-contemplative stage, and you'll have to do a little more work, but 90% of the time they don't do that. So you want to, whatever they give you, the next thing you should ask is, why does that number feel right to you? And this moves the entire thing out of I'm trying to change your mind to, you are now in charge of the situation of exploring, introspecting, and articulating things you may have never done before. And the person will, you could try yourself on anything, just like privately, like the last movie you watched, like ask yourself, what would you give it on a scale of 0 to 10? And then you'll give a number pretty quickly and then ask, well, why is that number right? And you can feel something cranking up inside you. You can almost feel yourself like going, oh, wow, why do I feel that way? And it's something we just don't naturally innately do unless we're prompted or we feel motivated to do so. And when a person starts articulating this thing, what starts to happen is they start to create the sort of language in their own mind that you would have probably attempted to shove in there, which is never always going to be pushed out. Nobody's going to allow that. But they might generate it on their own. And if you do it on your own, you're much more likely to stick. When it's, let's say they said they're a 7, if you could ask, why not a 6? Why not a 5? Why didn't you say 5? Whatever direction, if you're actually attempting to get someone to shift on the issue, whichever direction is the direction you're hoping for the conversation to go, ask them why they didn't go the opposite. So if you're a 10 and they're a 7, like ask them why didn't they go? Why weren't they a 5 or a 4? And they'll start producing their own counter arguments for why they didn't go farther away from where you expect them to be. Or generating their own counter arguments, that starts weighting the number of counter arguments they have in their head versus arguments for the issue. And this is, if you just keep working in this direction, the person on their own will articulate all sorts of reasons why they might feel differently about the issue, and it will become more complex in their mind. And that is, if you do it that way, it has the added benefit of, like, there's no coercion taking place. There's no
right.
Place. This is just stuff this
person.
Well,
their walls don't go up. It right is the key. They don't get that immediate like, oh, you're trying to convince me. Oh, it's you versus me.
You're not coercing them in any way. You're not copy and pasting anything out of your mind into their mind.
Right.
You're not. This is happening completely on their own. This is something that would have happened if they had ever sat down and contemplated this deeply in the first place. And once you've done all that, if you want to go deeper with it, you can. What reasons do they have to hold that level of confidence? And then as they produce those, which is pretty much what you're doing, you ask about the number.
Right.
Then you move on to the method part, which is the part where you let the rest of the conversation stay here and just leave whenever you feel like you've done enough of this. Ask what methods are they using to determine that those are good reasons to explain. Like what are the methods they're using to say that's a good reason to hold that confidence?
So I'm asking these. So sorry to interrupt. I'm going through. My mother-in-law doesn't listen to these, so I'm going to use her as an example. I'm going through these examples with her. She sees politically completely different than my wife and I, and we've just gotten to the point where it always ends in a fight. So right, no matter what you say or do, we usually just have agreed to shut it down and not talk about politics. And so yeah. I'm just thinking this through as you're saying these things, and I definitely am going to talk to my wife, and we're going to try this with Jane. And I'm just thinking this last question that you just said, like where you give me the exact wording you would use. Where did you get your?
Before I tell you that, if you're experiencing something with a loved one,
mm-hmm.
where the conversation always goes off into maybe we shouldn't talk about these issues together.
Yeah,
I can guarantee you what's happening here is reactance, and the conversation.
Is what?
It's reactance. I can almost guarantee it. This is what's keeping you from having the conversation you're trying to have. I've been doing these workshops with conflict negotiator Misha Globerman called the Conversation Lab, where we teach people how to avoid reactance. Reactance is just think of it as the easiest way to without getting into a bunch of psychology is to say, when I push, the other person's going to push back, and pushing is when I try to get what I want without acknowledging what you want. And it can seem like I'm not doing that, but if I'm saying, even because I might love you and care about you and not want you to be manipulated and not want you to be persuaded by these bad things, not want you to hold an attitude that hurts other people or causes harm in this world, all that kind of stuff, I can be totally on the right side of things in that way. And the way I talk to you can generate reactance regardless of that. If anybody who's ever been a teenager or has raised a teenager is familiar with reactance, which is somebody's trying to help you, they're giving you advice, and you're like, don't tell me what to do. And it doesn't even matter. Like yeah, maybe 20 years later, you'll think, oh man, I should have done that. In the moment, you can't help but in an animalistic way go, ugh,
right. Thinking about my kids. Yeah.
So you're talking to your mom about, or your mother-in-law about a political issue. If you start to say anything that can be interpreted as you should be ashamed for what you think, feel, and believe, or you are holding something that's making me not like you in some way, or if you say something that is in the domain of you ought to think what I think, not what you, the person will push. And what they're experiencing from you is a push, because what they're feeling is you're trying to get me to do something that I don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you are doing that. And when they push against it, our usual reaction is, by a very tiny degree, we will push back a little harder against them because we're feeling reactance. And then they'll push back a little harder against that. And you enter into a feedback loop where you get into that place where we start really bickering in a way that we feel like, right, oh, this could be damaging my relationship with this person.
Right.
So you'll have to do the work of a couple of interactions where you have no reactance to get the person to lower their defenses because they're expecting reactance. Mm-hmm. And that means to talk about the conversation, talk about the issue for the next 5 or 6 times you hang out. You probably need to do something that is, you're both working on a goal or talking about an issue that's not related, to kind of get that down to base. Then you can come back and engage in a conversation about the issue to avoid reactance completely. That is what I would recommend if you have a.
So okay, I got the first part. Do a couple times not reacting. Explain the second part. So let's say she starts going off, and so we would just essentially just sit there, say nothing, change the topic.
If she starts the conversation, like if she's saying, "Man, you heard this last thing about whatever,"
right. Which is usually which is the case. Always.
Notice inside yourself. Do you start feeling that hot, bubbly, I'm pissed off feeling?
Yep.
Like that is what you have got to get under control, because a lot of times our frustrations with other people are not really with them. It's our own responses. Because, like when we consider people to be unreachable, it's often the moon is unreachable or the ladder, and then we're like, well, you can't get there. That's because you're using a really poor technique and you're making it worse off than if you'd never done anything at all. So what you need to do in that spot where you feel that bubbly anger feeling coming up is it's totally okay to say, oh, I'm interested in how you see that. I don't, you can use this kind of phrasing like, I have such a different perspective on this that it's mysterious to me that we could see it so differently, because I love you so much and I care about you so much. And we see so eye to eye on so many things. The fact that we can see this differently, I wonder why that is. And you're getting it out of you're wrong, I'm right, Frank. Isn't it curious that we could both be these smart, intelligent people who care about each other and yet see something differently?
Yeah.
Now it becomes this sort of like it's almost like two generals on a battlefield trying to determine how they're person go forward. It's like two people trying to we're working together even though we have different perspectives, because we're trying to figure out, why would we do that differently? How would you do it? How do you see it? You can diffuse the situation by doing that, because you're offering the other person the opportunity. You're telling them, I don't think you're dumb. I don't think you're a bad person, but I am curious how you can see it so differently.
So
you are a good person.
Yeah. So correct. Sorry to interrupt again, but correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, to summarize all that, would it be basically you're coming from a place of we're on the same team versus me versus you is kind of the general thought process. Yeah.
It sucks that you have to continuously do that in every conversation, even with somebody you've known forever. But it's almost like for every one thing that's related to the issue, you have to do 2 things that keep the person feeling like they're in good standing with you. Like you have to say, we're all on the same team. I think you're smart. I trust you. I love you. We're on the same team. I'm really happy we're talking about this. You have to keep that going. There has to be a little bit more of that discussion of keep that person out of reactance so that you can discuss the issue.
Right. I love it. Your audio started. It's good, but we're starting to have like a little, like you're cut out here and there, but we're about to wrap this up anyways. I want to kind of wrap this up. That was a really interesting conversation. Thank you for having that. I was actually taking notes while we were talking about that, because I want to try. I'm going to experiment with this.
There's a great book on all this I recommend.
Yeah, what book?
It's called How Minds Change.
How Minds Change. Ooh. And the author, ladies and gentlemen.
On page 200 of that book, I start giving you the techniques, and you have them all like step by step by step. And then but we get to that by explaining all the science behind it and why it has to be this way and not some other way. But yeah.
I'm going to buy Jane a copy, but I'm going to present it in a way that is like, hey, let's read this together so that we can get back in the trust tree. Because we actually get along great. I love Jane. And it's this one issue that it's kind of like become this like, you know, nobody talks about it, and it always leads to a fight if we do. And so everybody's kind of on edge. Like, is it going to come up?
Yeah.
And then, you know, something inevitably happens every week, every day now these days, like a school shooting. And so that's been the latest thing she's been going off on, you know, and it's like, obviously, right. We have visceral reactions, my wife and I, because we have kids and we see things different than her on. And it's like, holy cow. So I mean, I knew all this, but I like how you're framing it. Like all this stuff that you're saying reminds me of the original Woodrow Wilson quote from the first self-help book I ever read, Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And he quoted Woodrow Wilson, who once said to the effect of, if you double your fists, I'll double mine just as fast. But if you come to me in an open, you know, manner where you say, hey, let's sit down and talk about this and figure out how we can come to an agreement, then I'm all in, type of thing. And that, you know, this is a couple hundred years. So this is a universal principle. And like you said, you forget it. And when people that are smart enough to know it, to learn it and actually incorporate it, I'm guessing have a much better life all around, because they're not constantly arguing with people and thinking that the other people are the enemy.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, this is really tough. And there are issues like the person you're talking to, their attitudes and their voting, like, could harm you or harm people you love. Like, I understand not wanting to go across the aisle for things like that.
Right.
But I also, like, for anyone listening, if you want to change people's minds, this is the only way that you can get what you want out of that. Like, if you're, like, there's all sorts of ways to create, but in the domain of, like, I would like to persuade people who see this issue differently to entertain a perspective. This is the only way you can get that to work. And unfortunately, it means you're going to have to non-judgmentally, empathetically listen to the other person, understand how they got to where they got, which is really hard when the person has a horrible belief or attitude related to something political. Let me do these two things. So we said so much stuff. I want people to have a takeaway. Like, you don't need all the steps that I gave you to really go going today. You just need two steps. One is, don't say anything or suggest anything to the other person that they could interpret as you should be ashamed of the way you feel about it. Even if they ought to be ashamed. Don't say that, because you will lose the opportunity to do step two. And then step two, ask about very specifically what you're talking about, so we're both on the same page. And then ask for, on a scale from 0 to 10, if it's a fact-based issue, how confident are you that this is true? And if it's an attitude-based issue, like, where are you on a scale from 0 to 10? 10 being the strongest you could feel, and 0, the least. And when they give you that, ask, why does that number feel right to you? And if you feel so inclined, ask, why are they not higher or lower on the scale? And just let the conversation play from there, and just be curious. And don't at any point go, that's a stupid thing for somebody to feel, and think. Just talk. People will talk themselves into it. You'll be amazed.
Oh, we just lost you at the very end there. Repeat that last part.
I said you'd be amazed at how just that kind of conversation can change. And it feels weird. Like, it feels like you're not trying to make anything happen. But I'm telling you, that kind of approach has a lot of success.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much, David, for sharing this. I just actually went online to buy your book on Amazon, and I don't see it. Is it officially out?
It's officially out.
I mean, it actually defaulted to How Minds Change, the New Science of Belief, Opinion, and Persuasion.
You're on Amazon. You're at the USA site. Some people have had a weird thing happen where takes them to the UK.
Oh, there it is. I just found it.
Cool.
Oh, on sale today, 10% off.
Cool. And if you're the kind of person who likes audiobooks, I do the whole audiobook.
Perfect. Yep. I'm buying it right now. And I'm going to read it and then give it to my mother-in-law, and I'm going to use that technique.
Let me know how it works out. I would love to get. I'd love to get to return to this and tell people what happened.
Yeah, for sure I will. Well, thank you. I know you got a lot of these today. Great chatting with you, man. Good luck with the book, and keep those ideas coming. This was fascinating stuff.
Yeah. I look forward to it. Reach out to me anytime.
Will do. All right, brother. Take care.
That's it for the 5 Core Life. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that like button on this video and pound that subscribe button so you get notified when new episodes drop. Also, please fill out the free 5 Core Life Evaluator quiz. It's a great way to get a baseline of where you are in the 5 cores and which of the 5 cores you need support. In addition, you'll get some actionable advice that you can apply and start improving your life in the areas that you need it most. That's it for today's episode of the 5 Core Life Podcast. Have a wonderful day.
Get moving. Gain momentum. Join the movement. Join Emmett by going to moremomentum.com to take a free life evaluator quiz on where you currently stand in each of your 5 cores.